welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. Over the last week, I have been noticing a pattern of an attachment style that really doesn't get a whole lot of airtime, definitely as much as the others do, right? So today, I want to get into that a little bit. I want to talk about the fearful-avoidant attachment. I've actually been writing about it for the last few days here and there because it's been showing up in some of the people I work with, some of the people I talk to, things I even read. It's not making a resurgence, but it just doesn't get a lot of airtime. It just doesn't, nobody really talks about it as much. They'll use avoidant like that's the only thing, but there's more to it, right? I want to talk about today how it overlaps into our lifestyle, what's it going to look like when it shows up in a dynamic, and how it does affect both sides of the slash, and the kinds of patterns it tends to show up in. We're going to get to all of that today. So we got a pretty big show today. It's probably going to go a little long, but that's okay. You guys like the extra content. At least I think you do. Nobody ever complains that, Chris, you talk too much. All right. Before I get into it, as I always do, week in, week out, I want to say thank you to all of you. Right? You keep showing up. You keep listening. You're sending me your questions and your comments. You're telling me where you're listening in from the show all over the world. And you're reaching out. I want to acknowledge a few things from some of the places I'm getting notices from. Not because, what's going on, but what I want to demonstrate to the rest of everybody is that this lifestyle, BDSM itself, right? I'm going to stop short and not go any further than that. Actual BDSM is the one thing that's unifying all of us, right? So from a few of you, and I want you to be safe where you are, that reached out to me from the Middle East, more in the Gulf states, to a few of you in the Eastern Bloc countries, right? Croatia, Bosnia, right? Hungary. I don't want to do too many big labels. I'm just doing countries right now. Netherlands, I see you represent. I appreciate it. Sweden. Yes, I got your email twice. I got it twice, so thank you. I see all of you, and I appreciate it. As I said before, I read everything I got, right? I can't always respond. I try the best. And for anybody who actually knows me, but if you followed my work long enough, you're going to know that I respond to thousands of comments per month. It's a lot. So sometimes I need a couple of days to get to it, right? If you're new and you're just finding the show because somebody recommended it to you or said, hey, take a listen to this, welcome, right? And I'm glad you found your way here. For the rest of you, or those who are like, man, this is awesome, Chris is the best. he knows what he's talking about, right? Do me a favor. If you're on Spotify and you're on that app, go over, rate the show 5 stars. It's the least you can do for me, right? I want you to do that because that allows others to find the show. It keeps the show growing. It keeps me right now keeping the show for free. I've been doing the show for free for you all for 5 years, right? This is year 5 now we're in, right? And if you're following me on YouTube, if you don't have Spotify, you can subscribe, follow. That way when the new show drops, you're going to get notified of it, right? And for those of you who want to support my work directly, and there have been a few of you and you wanted to remain anonymous, thank you. I appreciate it. It's not the amount, it's just the support, and I thank you. It does go a long way into keeping these conversations going, right? All right, enough of all that. The reason the reason this caught my attention is because it tends to sit in a little off to the side in most conversations. When people talk about attachment styles here, the discussion normally lands in 2 spots. Someone brings up either anxious attachment styles or then the person, that leans into the connection, they're looking for reassurance, or they talk about dismissive avoidance, right? the person who keeps the distance and then pulls back when things start to feel real. Now, somebody's going to say, well, we don't really talk about secure relationships. We don't need to. Why? Because they're strong. And as a matter of fact, I talk about them all the time, but they don't get direct recognition because, they're strong. And we don't, those couples who are reinforcing them and making them secure have these discussions, right? But what doesn't get a lot of discussion is the fearful avoidant, right? Because it doesn't, quite fit in either of those other boxes. That's why we only really have four main ones. Now, here, it's a pattern where someone can really want closeness, but the moment it starts becoming real, something inside of you is going to get tight, right? If they lean in, then a moment later they're going to pull back, and part of them wants that connection and another part doesn't quite trust it. Now, usually that's based on a system. It's how we were raised. Why do we talk about this? Why do I say this week in and week out? Because a lot of these things start as early attachment patterns when we're growing up, right? Maybe if we listen to this and get it and just don't think you're broken, right? You didn't just start this way. It's not how you were born. These are learned behavioral patterns, right? You can change this. It just takes time, right? But when this pattern shows up in our lifestyle, it plays out in ways that affects both sides of the slash, right? It's not just a sub thing. It's not just a dom thing. And actually, a lot more doms can be prone to this than you would probably consider. I know because I've spoken to a lot of them, right? But it shows up in the ways that how people bond, how vulnerability is handled, power exchange dynamics, that maybe carry more emotional weight than people start to realize. And this even goes to a article I read yesterday or the day before on social media. Somebody was talking about sub drop and like disassociation and trauma. And again, we're getting close to language, and I'm not going to spend any time on this. I'm just going to say my piece and I'm going to move on. But people are starting to get close to language where they're like, recognize this in your, recognize the difference, and you need to do. No, you don't need to do anything. I'm really tired of people trying, and let me be very clear on this. There's a difference between, well, something's going on with somebody. What do I do? What you do is you just give them space and comfort. That's it. You're not their therapist, right? You're not their medical doctor. You're not any of these things. So we need to stop telling people to take up that role, especially if you're even a dom or a sub. It really doesn't. I don't care if you're a dungeon monitor. If somebody's going through something, give them some space, give them some comfort, but you're not there. If they want to start unpacking it, you're not the person to listen. I'm sorry, you're not qualified to listen. Right? Enough of that, though. I'm not going to get into all that. I've said that until I'm blue in the face. People who keep taking this advice, I don't know what to tell you. Right? But what we are going to do today is we're going to talk about this. We're going to slow this down and talk through what this actually looks like. All right. All right. First, let's get. Sorry, I've got a little bit of hay fever. The weather's changing, the time of the year, so I'm a little bit stuffed up. So I apologize in advance. I'm gonna sound a little bit nasally or congested. It's because I am. All right. So let's do an attachment overview. Let's understand what attachment is. All right. Because before we get too far into this, I want to lay out a map. Right. So when we talk about attachment styles, what we're really talking about are patterns for how someone handles closeness, trust, emotional connection. And this is really when it matters because people are getting into relationships. Now, most of the time, you're going to hear the four main styles mentioned, right? The first one is always secure, right? Now, this is the one that people are usually aiming for. Everybody wants to be in a secure relationship. Now, someone with a secure attachment style is generally, they're comfortable being close to someone. They're comfortable standing on their own 2 feet. If something, if a conflict shows up, they don't immediately assume that the sky is falling and the world is ending. They talk through things, they stay present, and the relationship doesn't feel like it's hanging by a thread every time something gets uncomfortable. Just work through things and then they proceed forward. Now, next, we've got the anxious attachment style. Now, this is where I'm going to be generous. It's a lot more, but I'll actually not generous. I'm going to be a little bit more conservative, but I would say 60 to 70% of most conversations sit around this. What am I talking about? Anxious attachment style, right? Avoidant. Now, this is the person who tends to move towards a connection when they feel things, you know, are uncertain. But if the communication drops off or anything feels different, their instinct is just to close the gap. They reach out, they're going to look for assurance. They want to talk it through, maybe talk it to death. And sometimes that can come across as a whole lot of intensity. But underneath, what's actually going on is their need for stability in a relationship. Now, on the other side of that one, right, you have the dismissive avoidant. Now, this pattern is where someone leans in the opposite direction, right? So when that closeness starts to feel heavy, or their emotion starts to rise and then demanding more of them, the instinct here is to step back. So the independence becomes the priority, and they might pull away or get quiet or just start focusing on their job or their hobbies, anything that puts a little bit of distance between themselves and the emotional heat in the moment. Now, those three, and they are the ones you hear about the most. And if you spent any time reading the millions of relationship articles or listening to conversations about attachment, you probably heard anxious and avoidant tossed around like it's an Olympic sport, right? People tend to frame all of this like it's a tug of war. One person pulls, the other person, or they pull for closeness, and the other one pulls for space. But this is where the fourth one comes in. And this is what we're into today. This is some of you are going to recognize yourselves here, and that's okay. It's a style. Remember, this is a style. It doesn't mean you stay here, right? But we're going to talk about fearful avoidant attachment. Now, this one flies under the radar, not because it's rare, but because it's harder to pin down. It doesn't sit cleanly on one side or the other of the fence. Someone with fearful avoidant tendencies can want closeness just as much as someone with anxious, right? They want the attention, they want the connection, the intimacy, and even that whole deep bond. But at the same time, the moment that closeness becomes real, something inside says no. Wait a minute, breaks, right? So another part of them leans in, and the other part of them hits the brakes. If it's this whole internal push and pull that makes it confusing, both for the person experiencing it and everybody around them. So one day connection is strong and intense, maybe even honest, but then the next day it's quiet and hesitation, and they're holding back. Now, from the outside, this can look completely inconsistent. From the inside, though, it feels like being stuck between two instincts that don't necessarily agree with one another, right? It's a constant battle within yourself. And that's one of the reasons it doesn't get, as much attention in conversations about attachment. And people will often mistake it for dismissive avoidance, or sometimes even, anxious behavior. It just gets lumped into one bucket or the other because the pattern shifts depending on the moment. It's not a consistent pattern. When you slow it down and you look closely, it's definitely its own animal. And that's the pattern we're going to go into and spend some time unpacking today, and how it can show up in our relationships, especially inside of the lifestyle or with our friends or even inside of our family dynamics. All right. So, what does fearful avoidance actually look like, Chris? That's a hell of a question, because it doesn't necessarily look like one thing or another. But if we slow this down a little bit, it can look confusing from the outside, right? A lot of people describe it as mixed signals, or they'll tell you that, hey, I'm dating someone, but 1 minute they're hot, the next one they're cold, right? And then there's the closeness and the distance all at the same time. And it's just, we feel like we're dating somebody that's consistently changing their mind on the drop of a dime. But what's really happening isn't about the other person, it's the conflict happening inside of them. And at the center of a fearful avoidant attachment is the contradiction that lives in the same place at the same time, right? The person genuinely wants the connection, they want that closeness, they want to feel chosen, and they want to be understood by somebody else. When things begin to grow, but in that dynamic or that relationship, that part of them is present and alive, and they feel seen. Yet, the second voice doesn't trust the situation. It doesn't trust the stability or the connection. And more than anything, it doesn't trust what happens if they allow themselves to fully lean into it. So, because closeness exposes things, right, it makes us a little bit more vulnerable. The moment that connection becomes real, the protective system starts asking questions. Well, what if this changes? What if they see parts of me I'm not happy about? What if I let myself believe it and it all just disappears or goes away? So, what happens is a kind of this internal struggle and pushing and pulling against yourself. So, the person might lean toward the relationship at first. They might feel excitement or attraction or curiosity. And then, they're sharing little bits about themselves and they, feel genuine in their responses. And that part is all real. It's not manipulation or pretending. That's actually the desire for connection and it's completely legitimate. But when the relationship starts to move from possibility into reality, something shifts. And this is interesting because last week I talked about long distance relationships. And somebody asked me, which is kind of what started off this whole week long of me semi dropping hints about fearful avoidant people, is because, that distance, and I talked about it last week, that distance gives you safety, right? It's not real. I've got the fantasy, I've got the connection, I've even got the protocols, but they're not in my face 24/7, right? It's not a relationship. They're not seeing me brush my teeth, my hair all messy, or I've got a 5 o'clock shadow, or I've got food spilt on my right? All of that. So it's that push pull. They want it all, right? But here in a relationship, it's really in your face. The nervous system reads the moment a whole lot different. Now, psychologically, a lot of fearful avoidant patterns come from early experiences, the easiest way to say it, right? As most of the time, all those experiences were unpredictable. So if you got a whole lot of criticism that was, in your house growing up and care was inconsistent or affection was inconsistent, all of this starts to teach you, and it teaches your brain and your nervous system that these things, that a possible connection can also bring a lot of pain. So when that history exists, the brain learns one simple truth: stay close enough to feel the connection, but never close enough that someone has the power to hurt you deeply. And that becomes the scar. And that becomes the voice that we learn to protect ourselves with, as well as to keep others away while wanting the connection at the same. It's exhausting. For fearful avoidance, the one thing you're going to hear from them all the time is, I am constantly emotionally drained, right? So when someone kind of shows up in the present, the mind doesn't immediately relax into it. They start scanning, right? Their brain's just looking for everything. And they're looking for everything at once, the attachment as well as the danger. Okay. So a lot of people describe this as overthinking, right? But they're running these conversations over and over in their head. They're looking for signals of something's going to be off, whether the other person's intentions are genuine or not. And this is the strange part: calm and steady behavior can actually trigger more suspicion than chaos. So if someone is unpredictable, the brain already understands that terrain because it knows how to defend against it. But when someone is patient, consistent, or emotionally open, that's unfamiliar. And unfamiliar situations sometimes register as risk. And I recently talked about, just because something is unfamiliar doesn't mean it's unsafe, just means it's new. But the brain doesn't see it that way. And there are reasons I'm writing about this right now, because this is a pattern that's showing up, and it shows up for a lot of people. We don't know how to handle it. All we see is it's unfamiliar. This person's being nice to me. They're, they bought me flowers or opened the door, or, she told me, I got a text saying she missed me. All of these different things, there's no indication of risk. But the brain isn't registering it that way, and it's causing a lot of nervous reactions. Now, from the outside, this just looks like hesitation, but the inside, it's survival. And this is why fearful avoidant attachment is often misunderstood. It's not about not wanting closeness. In almost every case, the person wants that deeply. They just don't fully trust what happens once they allow themselves to depend on that, because they've never depended on it. So one part steps forward, and the other part of themselves keeps looking for the exit door. And I'm only giggling because that's literally what it is. Oh my God, this person's amazing. I just can't wait to start a life with you. And there's the other part of you inside going, oh my God, get me out of here. And that's the pull that constantly keeps happening. So let's get into some relationship patterns here. And now that we've talked about what this feels like on the inside, let's look how this actually shows up in relationships, because from the outside, all of this pattern here, this fearful avoidant pattern, looks confusing as hell. If you're the partner on the receiving end, it feels like somebody's moving the goalposts backwards and forwards, up and down, left and right. You just cannot get your footing. And one of the most common patterns is intense early connections. Things, they start off strong, the conversation flows, there's curiosity and emotional depth, right? Especially when you're just getting to know each other in the first couple of weeks. And for someone with fearful avoidant tendencies, these early stages feel exciting because it's the realm of possibility. Nothing's really landed yet that you're actually moving towards a relationship at light speed. Right? So possibility feels safer than the reality. But once that relationship shifts from potential into something real, that internal tension starts to show up. And it shows up like a marching band, loud and unavoidable. So this is sometimes where you'll see the emotional withdrawal. And it doesn't always happen overnight. It can feel sudden to the other person. One moment things feel open and connected, and the next one there's a whole lot of hesitation and being scared. Communication slows down, emotional access gets, restricted. It's not that the person doesn't care, but they're pulling in the reins because something inside is saying, hey, slow down before you get hurt. And this is what we don't understand about our system, because it hasn't been trained for us to recognize that sometimes it's giving us a false positive. So from the outside, this looks like mixed signals, because we got 1 minute this person that's we really like and we're getting to know, they're leaning in, and the next one there's like not answering calls or texts, or they're just going away, right? And this is why I always caution people on ghosting. You don't really know what's going on with the other person, and they could be sitting in this category, maybe having an internal struggle. I know it's not nice, and I'm not going to get into that, but you have to consider there's always other possibilities with somebody else when things are going on. Okay. Now, another pattern that shows up here is testing whether someone will stay. And for a partner on the receiving end of this is friggin' exhausting, because these tests aren't even always conscious. They're very subtle at times, right? That person's going to pull away just to see if you're going to chase, right? They say something really vulnerable, and then they watch how closely to see how you react. So paying attention to whether someone is becoming impatient or distant or judgmental, right? They're doing these things. It's the emotional equivalent here of dipping a toe in the water before committing to the swim. The problem is that partners don't always realize that they're being tested. All they feel is the shift in the dynamic, right? That hesitation, and then all of a sudden they're trying to make sense of it, and then all of a sudden all these misunderstandings start piling up. And then there's the other pattern where this shows up quite a bit: leaving before the abandonment can happen. I talked about this, right? With someone, who has these tendencies, starts sensing that the relationship is becoming emotionally important, the fear of potential loss can become louder than the comfort of the connection itself. So in those moments, ending the relationship early can feel like a form of self-defense, right? Let me end this before I get hurt. And they don't even want to, because part of them is like, there's nothing wrong here, and I'm falling for this person, or our scenes are great, or the sex is great, or whatever. We have the talk and we're in-depth conversations. The other part's like, that's a 5-alarm fire, get out of there, right? So they're reminding themselves, step away now rather than risk having the rug pulled out from underneath you later on. And then they listen, right? Because that fear, that defensive mechanism has kept him safe all this time. So from the outside, that decision seems really baffling. We're completely confused by it, because the partner might be thinking, hey, things were going well. What the hell just happened? But inside of that fearful avoidant person, the calculation looks a whole lot different. Their mind is trying to get ahead of the pain. So if their brain believes hurt is inevitable, it sometimes chooses to cut its losses before the emotional stakes get any higher. It's a bit like trying to read the weather and then deciding to leave the picnic before the storm even showed up. And worst part, there's no clouds in the sky and it's a sunny day. Now, here's the tricky part with all of this. To a partner, this can feel inconsistent. Sometimes it can even look manipulative. So that whole push pull and warmth, followed by distance, right? This feels like someone who's playing a whole lot of games. But more often than not, what's happening is a lot simpler. The person is trying to protect themselves while also wanting the connection. And those two instincts are pulling in completely opposite directions, right? They're opposite polarities. So they're going to push away from each other. So the relationship ends, you know, ends up sitting right in the middle of that tug of war with both people trying to figure out which direction everything's going to go. Now, I'm going to be cautious here and say this doesn't explain every interaction. Of course it doesn't. So don't take that as, gospel here. But what I want you to understand is this is a possibility and it can show up. Right? So let's get into the lifestyle and how this overlaps and shows up for some people here. Right? Because this is where things become extremely visible. Not because our lifestyle creates these attachment patterns, but because power exchange itself tends to amplify what's ever already there. It turns up the volume on our desires, our fantasies, our, willingness to explore. All of these things get amplified. So when people step into dynamics that involve trust and vulnerability and control and emotional exposure, attachment patterns that might stay quiet and everyday can suddenly start showing themselves in the loudest ways. So first I'm going to start with you subs. Okay? Just because we're going to get to the dominance, so don't think we're not, nobody's getting off the hook here, right? Now, for someone here, a sub with fearful avoidant tendencies, a dynamic can feel incredibly powerful in the beginning. That structure is grounding, the roles feel stabilizing, and someone who's trustworthy steps into that dominant ability for you and gives you consistency and attention and direction that creates that strong emotional bond very quickly, right? But because part of that fearful avoidant person genuinely craves that safety, they want it. They want to feel held in something solid and know that somebody's paying attention and that they're invested. So the dynamic itself can feel like a place where you can breathe a little bit. But this is where the tension starts creeping in. The same structure that provides safety can also start triggering the fear of dependence. The closer the emotional bond becomes, the more protective the system begins asking questions. What happens if this goes away? What happens if I start needing, this person more than I should? And that's when you might start seeing subtle tests. Nothing dramatic necessarily, just small moments where the subs is, watching how carefully the dominant responds, or they pull back a little bit to see if the dom notices, questioning whether, attention or care is consistent. Now, this isn't always a conscious decision, but underneath is a simple question. Are you really going to stay? And that's a big one. Now, let's look at the other side. Let's look at the dominance and explain here a little bit of an understanding because fearful avoidant patterns show up here too. And sometimes control can be a very effective shield for fearful avoidance. Now, a dom with fearful avoidant tendencies may be extremely capable in the scene. They're going to be focused and active, attentive and present, right? They can create these powerful emotional moments for their sub because they know how to guide the intensity and vulnerability in a contained space. But during the dynamic itself, connection can feel, it's going to feel deep. We're going to feel everything going on. But once that scene ends, that closeness that was just shared can start to feel really heavy. So you might see a dominant begin pulling back a bit, not necessarily rejecting the sub, but creating an emotional distance so things don't feel too entangled. It's kind of like opening the door wide during a scene and then closing it halfway afterwards. From the sub's perspective, that shift is going to feel really confusing because one moment the Dom is fully present and engaged, and the next they seemed reserved and guarded, right? But again, the same tension is operating. Part of the dominant values, connection. The other part is cautious about becoming too emotionally dependent or responsible for somebody else's emotional world. So they keep a hand on the wheel. And that's when attachment begins deepening, right? Because when that does, there's first that protective instinct steps in and it goes, wait a minute, I'm going to hit the brakes here. And here's the key idea to keep in mind. The lifestyle itself doesn't create these patterns. Power exchange doesn't magically produce a fearful avoidant attachment style. What it does is bring the existing pattern into a much sharper focus because kink dynamics deal directly with trust and vulnerability, control, surrender, exposure, right? Fantasy. So when these elements are on the table, attachment styles don't stay theoretical. They show up in real time. And if someone carries a fearful avoidant pattern into that environment, that push and pull between desire for closeness and fear of dependence become much easier to see. And sometimes for the partner, and sometimes for the person themselves, once they start looking closely enough. So this leads to this next part here, why calm can feel threatening. And after everything we've talked about today, there is an important question sitting underneath all of this. Why does calm sometimes feel uncomfortable? Right? Why does a steady, kind connection make someone tense up instead of relax? A lot of it comes down to learning, not the kind you're going to get to, books, but the kind that your nervous system picks up from experience. So if you've got someone who's lived through relationships that were where closeness included instability or criticism, betrayal, the brain starts building rules about that connection type. Not consciously, it just happens over time. But the brain is built to notice patterns. So if closeness often came with pain, the mind begins to link the two together. Being emotionally close doesn't just mean comfort, it also means risk. It means exposure or the possibility of getting hurt. So your nervous system develops that kind of early warning system. Stay aware, stay cautious, don't relax too quickly. And here's where things get trickier later in life. When someone calm and patient and emotionally steady enters the picture, the brain doesn't automatically register that as safety. Instead, it notices something else first. It notices that the situation is unfamiliar. And what did we say earlier? Unfamiliar can equal new, but it doesn't necessarily mean unsafe. But unfortunately, the brain here is going unfamiliar equates unsafe. And unfamiliar situations then put you on alert. So instead of settling in the moment, the mind starts scanning. It looks for every inconsistency, or it's trying to find a hidden motive or the thing that might actually prove this whole calm situation isn't as safe as it appears. You might hear this described as overthinking, right? You're going to replay the conversations and scanning every small detail and wondering if kindness is genuine or temporary. But underneath that mental activity is something simpler. The nervous system is trying to protect itself. So, if past experiences taught someone that emotional closeness can turn painful without warning, then part of their mind is going to keep a watchful eye or especially on anything that's new. It's a bit like someone who's been caught in a storm before, checking the sky every few minutes, even when the weather's clear. The difficulty here is that the brain doesn't always update those protective rules automatically. Just because someone is now in a healthier relationship doesn't mean that old system shuts off overnight. It takes time, and it takes repeated experiences of stability. And sometimes it takes recognizing the pattern itself. Currently, there's someone I'm working with that's starting to accept this, but it takes a while. You can't just say, oh, well, this is what it is. Here's the new pattern, follow it. Your brain doesn't accept that. It's repeating the behavior over and over and reassurance, right? Because once someone begins to notice that their mind is bracing for danger, even when the ground underneath them is steady, they start to see the difference between the past that taught them this and what the present might actually be offering them. Now, as I wind this down today, kind of bring this into a full circle for you all, because I know this is something everybody's been kind of hinting at. These patterns aren't, not wanting a connection. That's not what this isn't about. Most of the time, the desire for closeness is real. It's very real. So the difficulty comes from what the closeness exposes once it becomes genuine. Because when someone starts seeing you clearly, the protective system that kept you safe in the past starts making a whole lot of noise. So part of you that wants that connection, and it's that inside going, come on, we're ready, and then the other side, and use calculating how to avoid the pain if it disappears. So that's that tension we've been talking about all throughout this show. And in the BDSM here, that tension become more visible because power exchange asks for trust in ways ordinary relationships avoid. And our dynamics involve all of these things: emotional exposure and surrender and control. And those things don't just sit on the surface. The reach of them is much deeper. So when attachment patterns already live there, the lifestyle doesn't just, it didn't create them. It just brings them into the light. And nothing is worse when something gets exposed. Right? Some might crave the safety of the dynamic while also fearing the whole dependency that it creates. Right? Someone might provide structure and control while quietly keeping emotional distance so they don't feel too exposed themselves. None of that makes, someone manipulative or broken. And more often, it means the person is trying to balance two instincts that don't fully agree with one another: the instinct to connect and the instinct to protect. So the work for a lot of people isn't choosing one or the other. It's learning when the protective system is responding to the present and when it's reacting to something that happened a long time ago. Because the past is a way of whispering into the present if we don't recognize it. So I have a question for you all to sit with, because I think this is an important topic. When closeness begins to feel real in your life, are you responding to the person in front of you? Are you reacting to the ghost of the experience that came before them? That's not a challenge that I'm giving you all. It's an invitation to be honest with yourself. All right, let me get into a few things. We are going to continue moving forward with random acts of kindness. I want to address a couple of things. First, please, in the AMAs, do not ask me personal questions. Okay? For privacy and safety, I don't disclose a lot of things. Because first off, if I ever make this more about me than the work that I'm doing, I am no longer coming to you all being authentic, and you all don't get words to understand how you feel. So if you ask me about that stuff, I'm not going to answer. I have never, ever put myself ahead of this work, right? I don't do it for the veterans I work with, and I don't do it here. So please be respectful with that. I've talked about this in the past, but I think I need to address this again. And the same goes for innuendos. I'm flattered, but I'm not interested. All right. If that's not really clear enough. No, it's not me being mysterious. No, that's not code to try harder. I'm generally not going to answer you. All right. And it's not me being rude. I also don't owe you an explanation. Okay. That's as close as I'm going to get to all of it. Now let's move on to something else. Random acts of kindness. Right. The world's in a chaotic place. I'm not going to go into all that, and I don't care what side wants to blame the other, because to be honest with you, everybody is at fault. We all make a choice, right? If you choose to be an asshole or a bitch to someone because whatever, then you're choosing that. And if the other person is choosing to do that to you, you're making a choice. Unless they're invading your private space or threatening your life, that's a different story. But you have a choice to walk away, right? It doesn't make you less than. Your ego doesn't, don't listen to what the ego is saying. If we all want to work on healing, and I'm talking around this planet, it's got to start with us. Okay. And to demonstrate this, so, last week I've been getting some great emails, and there's been some comments about people helping animals and helping others. This past weekend for me, went out, do as I do, go get my groceries, right? This guy walked up to me, and I'm not much for them, but he asked me for like $2, and I looked down at what he had, and he had a pig's head to cook and eat. And I said, no, I'm really sorry. I don't have any cash on me. All he said to me was, okay, thank you. He didn't press for anything. But I told him, I said, I tell you what, give it to me, I'll buy it for you. Right? I know the guy, like, he looked a little bit homeless. I'm not telling you this for clout, right? But I'm telling you this out of the genuine goodness of my heart. I did this because I believe if we are going to do these things, it has to start with us. So I got him that. I think I got him some potatoes and a couple of other little things. Wasn't much because I didn't have a lot of money on me, you know. And I gave it to him, and he just said thank you. That was it. Appreciated it. Saw the tears in his face. Said nothing more. I even asked him, you got a place to cook it? He said, yes. I said, best of luck to you. Enjoy. You deserve it. And he's like, are you sure you don't want the money? I said, please keep your money. I didn't do this for that. Right? I'm not telling you this for clout. I am telling you this because if I want to hope to inspire thousands of you that listen, if we want to make a choice and a change, if we want to be better than everything that we're seeing, we have to do this type of stuff. I'm not telling you to go out and spend money at a homeless shelter, right? But donate your time. Maybe go work and do a soup kitchen, right? Go clean up your neighborhoods. Go pick up some garbage. Go save the environment. Stop telling others. Stop doing, you want to demonstrate, that's fine. I have a different political ideology than you do on that because it doesn't really invoke change. You want to start change? Start with yourself. Clean up your own house first, right? I've been to places like Korea, South Korea, where the communities were great. I saw there was hardly any graffiti and I went all over South Korea, right? Communities, there was people out in the morning picking up on the street. They were just picking up garbage because they wanted to. And there wasn't even a whole lot because they wanted to keep their place looking neat, right? I'm not saying they don't have their own problems. I know I've talked to people in Korea about BDSM. I'm not saying their country doesn't have their own issues, but I'm just saying they look at their community differently than we do, right? Be the change you want to be. That's what I'm telling you to do. And try to be some kind. You want to do stuff for animals, you're going to win. That's the closest way to my heart. That's the quickest way to my heart. Do something for animals, right? Go to the local shelter, ask them if you can donate some of your time or buy them some puppy food or something, right? Whatever it is, do something random. Make somebody else's day, right? A little bit of goodness, right? I heard something interesting this past week. I'm not going to get into it because it's a little bit more religious, but it was something from like the mid 1960s where this guy talked about if we want to trick the world into thinking I don't exist, this is what I would do. It was kind of scary because this was from like the 1960s, this guy was talking about, and it's happening now. I don't know if I give it all that much credence. I'm not here to discuss religion, right? But from an observational standpoint, it's a pretty interesting concept, right? So let's be better. Maybe go to a dungeon. Help that person who owns a dungeon is struggling a little bit to make everything perfect for Fridays and Saturdays, and they need a little bit of help. Donate some time there, right? Or whatever you want to do. I don't know what support, you're in. But all I'm asking you to do is be kind to one another. That's it. It's not a lot. And you've got your question for the week. I had something else. God, it was just in my mind. It's like, Chris, tell him, and then I forgot. Oh, coming up. So, yes, I am going to do a political show. Why? Because you know what? I keep seeing these debates. I keep seeing the ugliness. And I'm not saying it's not from one side or the other. I see the ugliness on both sides. It doesn't even matter where I sit. To be quite honest with you all, I probably sit somewhere near the middle. I'm more moderate. I'm still a conservative because, I've got some different values. It doesn't make me wrong nor right, right? If you email me with a whole lot of hate, well, maybe you should look at yourself when you're sending that type of email and the things you're making the accusations of and how you're verbalizing that, and then realize the thing you are accusing others of doing, doesn't matter which way you're going, you have become. But you have to open your eyes to it. So if you want to talk politics and religion and kink with or politics and kink with me, let's go. Right? I'm going to do the show within the next, 6 weeks. Right? Because I'm going to start gathering my own side. And if I have no one to talk to about this, I'm going to do this from the two main political parties I see from around the world. So I'll look at the U.S. I'll look at the U.S. system, the Democrats and the Republicans, and I'm going to look at the bigger global ones, which is pretty much the parliamentary system. I'll look at what is predominantly like national and labor parties, which is like UK, Canada, Australia, right? And maybe some smaller systems throughout, right? I'm not going to get into autocracies or where it's more of a tyrannical rule, because that's kind of pointless. There is no discussion, right? I'm not going to do that. Second, religion and kink. Yep, I'm willing to talk about it. I was raised Catholic. You all want to get into that? We can. That one will probably be done within the next couple of months. There's a lot of you want to talk about the symbology of it. I'm very happy to do that discussion. Pardon me. So let's do it if you want to talk about it. Beyond that, no. I'm gonna start working with Hi There Catsuit to get him in. I've got some other things going on. It's not about him, it's about me. All right. So with that said, think about the question I asked you. Here it is one more time. When closeness begins to feel real in your life, are you responding to the person in front of you, or are you reacting to the ghosts of your experiences that came before them? All right? That's it. It's not a challenge, people. Promise. Until next time, everybody, be safe, stay kinky.